Hi guys, and welcome back to the final video in this series where I'm designing an assistive device for my neighbour Cath. As a recap, I've been designing a dexterity game that focuses on arthritis exercises for the fingers, specifically pinching, and the game is themed around a bird making a nest on the back of an elephant. The aim of the game is to use the peg-like birds to stack the twigs for the nest without any of them falling off. At the end of the last video, we sent our initial CAD models to the 3D printer, so let's see how they turned out. So here it is, prototype number 1. Whenever I create prototypes, I always like to do some personal testing before testing them with the end users. So here were some of my initial thoughts after a few minutes of solo gameplay. First up, all of the pieces came out with no printability issues, and the peg mechanism worked just as I'd expected. The game struck a nice balance between being challenging whilst also being achievable, and in all honesty, it was much more fun than I thought it would be, as I'm not usually a big fan of these skill and action type games. It was relatively easy to stack the blocks, but there were times where I thought I had released a piece when in fact I hadn't, and it was still being gripped by the bird. When the stacks of blocks did fall off, the pieces sometimes went everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Having to go rummaging under the table every 5 minutes to find blocks kind of ruined the flow of the game, so that definitely needed to be addressed. I also quickly realised that there was currently no rule encouraging players to pinch the bird with different fingers, so I knew I need to figure out a strategy for that moving forward too. Finally, my biggest concern was whether the Tetris-style blocks were too abstract, and the game's theme of stacking twigs to build a nest wasn't really coming through. After my first review of the game, I reached out to Cath to see if she'd be able to meet up. Unfortunately, she was on holiday for the rest of the week, but this gave me time to refine some of the problems that I'd spotted previously. I started with some basic things like creating a tray to catch the pieces and a dice that could be rolled each turn to determine which finger you had to pinch the bird with. I then moved on to the thing that was bugging me the most, the theme. I wasn't sure whether I was overthinking it, but I went ahead anyway and started creating alternative twigs that actually looked like twigs. As I was designing them, I thought I might as well mix up the gameplay and have two completely different styles of game for Cath to test. So rather than stacking the twigs, the new versions were designed to hang or hook onto themselves. For the new game, I also created a new elephant and a different style of bird, which, like the twigs, looked a lot more realistic. As I mentioned earlier in my design process, exploring multiple options concurrently can be a real time-saving approach, whilst also providing the end user with a broader range of choices to consider. So at this point, I had 2 games ready for Cath to test, but I still had some time before she returned from holiday, so I decided to do some more user testing. This was actually an important part of the process because in our early discussions with Cath, she was extremely passionate about making something open source that could help not only her, but other people around the world. So I started with my 2 friends, Zoe and Alex, who lucky for me were board game experts. Up until now, the rules of the games were quite vague. Each player started with an equal number of twigs, and the aim was to take it in turns to stack or hook them onto the top of the elephant. If pieces fell off, the active player would then take them back into their stack, and the aim of the game was to get rid of all your twigs first. The rules had some serious flaws though. For example, what if neither player could get rid of all of their twigs? Would the game go on forever? Rather than trying to work this out myself, I asked Zoe and Alex what they thought, and lucky for me, they came up with a great idea. The new rules were as follows. For each twig you successfully place, you get 1 point. Any twigs knocked off during your turn would be placed on your board and are counted as negative points at the end of the game. You can end the game at any point by placing your bird onto the structure, which gives you an additional 3 points. Once your bird is placed, however, the other player then gets to place as many twigs on as they can, and their turn ends if they drop any twigs or if they also place their bird on the stack. The overall winner is the player with the most points at the end of the game. I moved on to test these games with my parents, and the new scoring system worked really well. The rule of the game ending when you place your bird also opened up the game to be much more strategic. They did mention, however, that some of the bird designs were a little awkward and painful to use, and they felt that the game was the hanging twig pieces had a lot more suspense to it than the stacking ones. So at this point, I was really happy with how the testing was going, and it was now time to show Cath. She was so excited to see what we'd been up to and genuinely seemed to enjoy both games. I was particularly encouraged when she mentioned that both games felt like a real finger workout and not just a game. That said, there were some pretty important insights that came from playtesting. Firstly, to our surprise, Cath preferred the second bird design, which we initially thought would be much harder to use. Cath explained that the reason for this was that although the first bird was easy to pinch, the lack of feedback made it difficult to know whether the twigs were in the bird's grasp or not. The shape of some of the birds also made it awkward to pick up the pieces from the table, depending on which fingers you were using. Finally, we both found it difficult to read the graphics on the dice and kept forgetting the scores as we were so focused on the gameplay. Showing Cath the project after such a long time was a really great experience, and after around an hour of gameplay, we made the decision to focus on the second version of the game, which took the edge in terms of user-friendliness and fun. It also required you to bend and rotate your wrist in various positions, both of which are encouraged exercises for arthritis. So after all this user testing, I had a list of improvements that I went through over the next couple of days. These included several small refinements to the birds, twigs and the elephant, but the main thing was the redesign of the game board, which I must say I'm pretty proud of. The game board includes a central base that secures the elephant in place, a tray for each player, which includes a tree that holds the twigs. This means that you don't have to pick them up off the ground anymore. A spinner to replace the dice, which has improved graphics to make it easier to read. A score tracker that allows you to count up positive points as you go. And my favourite thing out of all of it is that it folds up into a neat little suitcase that acts as a storage solution for the entire game. When it comes to designing models made up of multiple components and mechanisms, it's very rare that you get it right first time, and that was certainly the case here. But after a few iterations and a few dimensional tweaks, we had the final product, which we named Pinchy. Let's check it out. So the suitcase game board is designed with a series of hinges that make use of strands of filament for axles, and is secured shut with this latch mechanism on the top. When you open the suitcase, it simply folds out to reveal the internal game board and game components. From there, each player can collect a different coloured bird and a set of twigs before assembling their tree. At this point, the game begins with the first player using their spinner to determine which fingers they need to use to pinch with. As the game goes on and twigs are successfully placed, positive points can be added to the player's point tracker. Any fallen twigs are placed on the ground in the user's play area, and at the end of the game are counted up as negative points that get deducted from the player's final score. Now that it's all assembled, let's get the game packed up so we can head over and show Cath. As you can see from Cath's reaction, she absolutely loved the final product. And although we've reached the end of this project, this is just the beginning for Pinchy. Our plan is to release the model open source so anyone, anywhere can download, make and play the game. Over time, we'll be sure to make improvements ourselves, but we're even more excited to see what the design community can come up with. So, to finish off this video series, let's hear a word from Cath.
It's amazing. I absolutely love it. When I first read about that you could print, I had no idea. I couldn't grab the concept at all, that how it worked. The thing about it is that it's not ages.
Yeah.
And that is one of the most, that is singularly, I think that's why people don't buy the things on the market, is that then you think, my God, I'm buying all these things for old age pensioners. Not, can I get that over to you? That
Yeah.
It's another knock or another nail in the coffin in that, oh yeah, I'm 76 now and I have to have all these things for other people. And it's just a breath of fresh air, isn't it? And like I've said, my fingers are really painful, but I do that because it makes me laugh.
Yeah.
And it makes me smile. And it's just, isn't it? It's just uplifting.
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 A great way to end it.
Yes, it's uplifting. It's a joy. And I'm going to keep it on here.